What's up, everybody? Welcome to the first episode of Perhaps. That's this new podcast I'm doing. And I'm just going to roll with it. This is all very new to me. I'm nervous. I'm excited. I'm intrigued to see what happens. I got a loose outline here beside me, and we're going to talk about some stuff and see what happens. So a podcast. I don't have a podcast. I do stuff on YouTube, and I got a Substack page. If you're not subscribed to my Substack newsletter, go subscribe. But I also haven't posted on there in a long time either. I'm on Instagram. I haven't posted on Instagram in a long time either. And I have a book. Oh, wait, it's behind me. Oh, yeah, there's a video version for everybody listening, by the way. I'm going to put this on YouTube and then also on the podcast apps. But there's a book behind me, The God Who Riots, that came out in 2022. Yeah, I write books. I'm writing another book right now. And also on Broadleaf Books. Awesome people. And that's partly why I've been missing a bit from posting on the internet, because I've been working on a book and also just going through a lot personally, mentally, emotionally. And I wanted to start a podcast. I'm going to get into why I wanted to start a podcast, how we got here, what's been going on, and my vision for this podcast. But yeah, I get it. It's strange. Actually, it's probably not that strange for you. It's super strange for me. But for all y'all, it's like, yeah, Damon's talking again. Bro's just talking. Yeah. But for me, it's very different. And I'll get into why. I'll get into why I'm wanting to start this. But first off, let me say, I've been pushing this for a while. I've been pushing starting this for a while. And it's not because of the election, by the way. Like after the election, I saw a bunch of people saying like, men need to start podcasts so that we can have actually positive, helpful, healthy online spaces for young men so that they don't vote for Trump, which is understandable. Probably the most extreme of that discourse was saying we need a Joe Rogan of the left, which is wild and funny. This is all extremely online crap that I'm talking about here. I'm sure some of you, the healthier ones, are not. We're attuned to that weird discourse. But it was interesting to see because underneath it all was people saying, of course, I'll get to it. Where there's be many tangents, by the way. Maybe even me being meta and calling out the tangents, but that's okay. It's a podcast. That's one of the reasons we're starting a podcast, so that we can have these tangents. Anyway, underneath that discourse, I think, was people realizing, one, there's a danger here with all this right-wing content out there that's manipulating people into dangerous beliefs. Even, dare I say, Christo-fascistic beliefs. Fascist is a big word, I know. I don't like throwing it around loosely. But I think we're getting to a point where a lot of young men, especially young white men, if you were to like break down some of the principles of fascism without using any of the scary words, they would be like, oh yeah, I agree with that. Which is like a strong state that is super nationalistic and controls the corporations and uber capitalistic as well. And what else? I'm blanking on some of the classic ones. All the ones that's coming into mind is like using the scary words. Unified people, unified nationality, unified culture, and pushing out anyone who challenges that. And yeah, again, I'm thinking it's a scary word. Okay, you get it though. You get it. There's more to fascism, of course. But anyway, why am I talking about fascism right now? It's okay. It's a podcast. So one, I think that was the one thing underneath that discourse is the fear of that, the realizing the reality of that. Two, is realizing that there aren't actually many left-ish voices out there that are pushing out awesome perspectives. But here's the thing. One, a lot of these right-wingers have funding behind them. So that's one big reason. Two, I think what we actually are seeing is not, I mean, a lot of these people aren't even trying to be right-wing podcasts. They just happen to give right-wing beliefs. But what we're actually seeing is that it's really easy and tempting to just oversimplify the world and play into people's fear and anger and be super individualistic with the way you interpret the world. It's so much easier to say it's that group of people over there. It's all their fault. It's the libs. It's the immigrants. It's the gay people, the trans people. It's the Jews. And yet the world is so much more complex than that. I think we need to have conversations about systems and the history of systems and how we got here, the ways that wrongdoing happens as a result of systems that were already set in place that allow for wrongdoing. And the ways to change that isn't exactly getting rid of groups of people, but by changing systems. And the people who benefit the most from these systems are so happy that we're blaming each other for everything. That's so much more complex when you just are scrolling and just want to see something funny and catchy and provocative. And so it's like, I think some people just want an individualism of the other side. We want our guy who's going to be individualistic in the way we like, blame the people we hate and praise the people we like, and vote for the people we like, when it's so much deeper and more complex than that. And anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. Let's go back. I'm not starting this podcast because of that. I was worried because I've been wanting to start this for a long time. And I was planning actually to start it November-ish. And I was hoping that people didn't think I'm responding to the call. I'm going to be the Joe Rogan of the left. This isn't even necessarily like a left-wing podcast. I don't plan for it to be. I also don't plan for it to be a spiritual, religious, theological podcast either. I want it to be a bit more boundless. We'll get to that, though, when we talk about the name and the inspiration behind that. We'll get to it. There's a lot to get to. And so, yeah, why am I starting this podcast? It's not because of that. Two, oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to say at the very beginning, I was really postponing this for a long time. I was hoping to start it back in like October, hoping to start it back in November, and then November came and went, and I was overthinking it a lot, thinking, oh, well, I need a name. I don't have a name yet. Or I don't feel confident yet. I don't feel comfortable. Or there's these other things I have to do. Let me get further on the book, right, that I'm working on. Do this and that first. Came and went. December, I'm for sure going to do it in December. December came and went. Okay, for sure, like right when we hit 2025, I got to start this. And 2025 came. It's 11:57 p.m., January 3rd. And today I started to get some cold symptoms. A bunch of people I know just got sick. Some of them got the flu, and it was only a matter of time before it got me. And I was like, oh no. I was like pushing it day by day, like, oh, not today, tomorrow, maybe the day after that, maybe the day after that. And then I got hit with this, and I'm like, okay, I know how this goes down. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and my voice is going to be hardly there, and it's going to be hard to talk, and I'm going to be coughing a lot, which makes it hard to go sentence to sentence. And that means I either have to wait like a week or two to start this podcast, or I just do it now. and stop overthinking so much. I'm going to explain a bit of what went into this. It's going to sound like a lot of overthinking, but trust me, there could have been way more overthinking. This is actually an example of me overcoming my bad habit of overthinking and just showing up and just doing it. And so my voice already is like almost, it's like a little deeper than normal. It's going. I was coughing a little bit earlier. I got this Mucinex throat spray. I sprayed down my throat and made sure that I was good and ready to go. And then tomorrow, my voice is going to be gone. I don't know. I'm not sure when I'm going to post this, but we got to record this now. We out here. Another reason we're starting this podcast. Let's see here. I've been rethinking a lot about my approach to everything, to making stuff online. I mean, I started, let's see here. Let's see where should we start in this story? I started making stuff online many years ago, but really like the YouTube stuff was when I really like started to take it seriously. And that was in 2018, and then 2019, and then 2020, I got a book deal because I was able to. And also I was doing Twitch live streams and stuff on Instagram and talking about really like a leftist Christian perspective. That was like my main focus that I tried to hone in on. And I felt like there was such a lack of that perspective and that education and discourse on the internet. And I knew there was a lot of stuff in books, a lot of stuff in scholarly essays, a lot of stuff in some podcasts, but there was like nothing on YouTube. And I felt like I wanted a community to talk about this stuff with, as I was learning these different perspectives, specifically really inspired by liberation theology and decolonial perspectives, decolonizing Christianity. And I was, excited to talk about this stuff, and it worked out. Some people came along for the journey, and we started building a little community here. And that's how I got the book deal. And I wrote the book, The God Who Riots, came out in 2022. And when that came out, I went through a bit of burnout after that. It was really, really hard to write that book, and then really, really hard to go through that season and promote. It was like 2 giant projects back to back, working on the book and then promoting the book. Let me take a drink of water. I'm not even going to cut this out because it's a podcast. I wonder how many times I'm going to say it's a podcast. Guess what? I can say as many times as I want because it's a podcast. Okay. Burnt out, and I needed to chill for a bit. I needed to spend some more time with the people around me, family and friends. I needed to, get a better understanding of how I wanted to move forward. And I knew that I wanted to do things differently, and my perspectives was changing, but I couldn't really understand what direction they were changing in. I just knew that there were certain types of content that I wasn't interested in making. I just didn't know what I wanted to make, what I wanted to actually say. And we'll get more into that later. It's in my outline. And it was really difficult. But I wanted an outlet where that was more free than some of the outlets I'd created for myself before, which was like, I'm the guy who's going to talk about Christian leftist stuff. Now it's like, I want this outlet where I can show up week by week by week by week and actually not burn out. because it's less. I'm not sure, less restrictions, I guess. And we'll get more into that. I'm realizing now as I'm going through, as I'm like my eyes turning to the side, looking at the outline, that I'm actually skipping some things. Let me go back in order. Okay. Podcast. Why we're starting this podcast. Let me explain my perspectives on podcasts, how they've changed over the years. Yeah, let me go back and say how I was a minister. I was an evangelical minister. That was like what I thought I was going to do. I thought I was called by God to be a pastor of a church. And I thought that's what I was going to do. I studied for that. I did some Bible college. I didn't graduate, but I did some Bible college. I did some ministry training program, got a certificate from some internship thing that I did through my denomination that I grew up in. And I was planning to plant a church and get prepared for that. I was a youth and young adults minister for a while, leading my own youth group and young adults group, and having a lot of fun and learning a whole lot. But the more I learned, the more I disagreed with the conservative denomination I grew up in. Still very Christian, still very passionate about Jesus, but Jesus was leading me out of this conservative fundamentalist interpretation of Christianity, which I used to think was the Christianity, only to discover it's actually just a branch. There's actually way more. And it's way more life-giving and beautiful and awesome out there. And so I left in 2017. And at the time I was like, okay, now I can be honest about everything I actually believe. Because for years I thought I could just like slip under the radar and synthesize ideas and make it work until the point where it just literally couldn't. And so I was like, now I can be honest. I got this YouTube channel. Let me be honest about my beliefs and try to help people through YouTube. Also, a thing that people do is start podcasts. I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time, progressive Christian podcasts, some theological podcasts, some like deconstruction, ex-evangelical themed podcasts. And I had been listening to podcasts within that realm since like 2012-ish. And that was like some of the things that really helped me explore and think differently, listening to all these interviews with these different authors and speakers and creators, and really blowing my mind. And so I felt, okay, I guess I need to start a podcast. I would like to do it with my friend. My friend Kayla and I started a podcast, and we like combined ideas. She at the time was interested in doing a podcast that really like talked about spiritual or psychedelic experiences. Psychedelic though, but not necessarily from drugs, but like like an experience of transcendence, of weirdness, of whoa, there's way more going on here, on or off drugs. And I was interested in doing some sort of progressive-ish Christian theological podcast. And we combined ideas and we called it Everyone is Talking About God. And I really liked that title. And it was really trying to get at like, we want to talk about God and culture and religion and spirituality, but from a bigger perspective, and talk about how there's all these experiences we have that I think could go under the category of God, that the church doesn't usually. The church is a big statement. Most churches, there you go, would reject as divine. And so I had a lot of fun. We did some podcasts where we just talked to each other. I interviewed a bunch of authors that I really liked. And then I got super depressed because I tried to skip the necessary grieving process from losing my community. And it all just came back and I had to go through it. And Kayla was getting busier with her job and her family. And so she couldn't do the podcast anymore. And so it was just me which sucked because I felt like, oh, I can't do it by myself, but I guess I'll make it work. And then when I came back from that season of depression and back to making stuff, I was doing YouTube still too. And the YouTube stuff started taking off a bit. People started actually watching. And I was building a little community there. And I just got wrapped up into that and felt like that was like way more fun and life-giving. And there was more people and like feedback there on YouTube than there was and with the podcast. So, and it was like easier because it was just me talking to a camera than like trying to get interviews and stuff. And so I stopped doing the podcast. And it was, it was a very organic thing. And you can't even find episodes of the podcast anymore. I stopped paying for the hosting. And there's a few episodes that are on my YouTube from way back, but that was that. And I thought, why do a podcast? That people don't listen to podcasts that much anymore, right? Way more people watch YouTube, and way more people watch Instagram and look at Instagram. Way more people look at TikTok. Way more people look at live streams. Way more people look at like all this other stuff that I was trying to do. And it felt like if I were, a podcast there wouldn't be much there for me, and it wouldn't be as fun. And also later, as my thoughts evolved in it, I thought, okay, maybe there is something interesting about podcasts. It's like, I realized like, oh, it's just a different group of people. I realized like there's a lot of people that listen to podcasts but don't watch YouTube at all, and a lot of people that watch YouTube but don't listen to podcasts at all. I'm these days typically the YouTube watcher, not the podcast listener. And but then a few people would tell me over time, you should start a podcast. It'd be really cool if you started a podcast, or you should like just take the audio from your YouTube videos and put it on a podcast. And I just thought like, I don't know. I felt like if I were to start a podcast, it would be stretching myself way too thin. There's already too much I'm trying to do, and that I'm having fun doing, and I don't want to do too much. And then as my thoughts evolved, I thought, actually, you know what? If I start a podcast, I want to do it with a co-host again, because that was fun doing it with a co-host. So I'll just hold it in the future realm, and just like when it makes sense, it'll happen. If I ever find someone that I feel like I need to start a podcast with, then we'll make it happen. And that's that. But I need another drink of water. It's a podcast. Okay. Trying to stay on. Trying to stay on board. What were we talking about? It's okay. It's a podcast. Okay. Oh yeah. That was the vision for years. Then I started thinking recently, like a bit of what I was sharing earlier. I wanted an outlet where I can show up and talk to y'all and be creative, speak my mind, talk about things that I think are important, build a community like I've been doing, but do it in a way that is more free flowing, and that is easier for me to show up consistently. Because I realized like I had set up for myself this precedent with some of the YouTube stuff and Substack stuff and book stuff and Instagram stuff, that I'm the guy that talks about the Christian leftist stuff. And then I'm like, that requires me every single week to like have something to say on such a specific set of topics. And my mental health was going up and down. And there was plenty of seasons, I was going to say weeks, but whole seasons, where I didn't have anything to say. I couldn't make my brain work like that. And I realized it would be awesome if I just have an outlet like this, where there couldn't be a week where I talk about some of the important things that I think are worth saying. And if there's some weeks where it's very difficult for me to put mental effort into doing some research and figuring out something, then I'll still be able to show up and talk about something else. Tell some stories. Talk about some stuff going on in my life. Talk about some things I've learned in the past. Talk about something that some of you have said and respond to that. It's like I just again, this is a lot of overthinking. I just felt like I don't know. This is all me. I know it's all me. I just felt like I couldn't do that in other outlets. And I feel like I hear you. I hear you all. I hear you all. I hear you saying, Damon, we love you, bro. You can say whatever you want in whatever format you want, through whatever outlet you want, on whatever platform you want. It's not a big deal, dude. I know. This is my way. This is my way of slowly rescuing myself from my overthinking. This is how we start. Baby steps, people. Just go with it, all right? Just go with it, please. Please, I'm begging you. And so I wanted to start this podcast also because, like, as a creative choice of like wanting to, or like, yeah, as a creative outlet that I can do more consistently, easier. And, oh yeah, and it's just me, which is a creative choice. It's not me interviewing people. It's not me with a co-host. And that's something that switched in my head of realizing, hold up, I could do this by myself. I could do this. I could do this. I don't need somebody else. And that's another thing. Like, it's easier to do it by myself. That's one of the factors that helps me do this more consistently week by week. I don't have someone else that I have to like worry about. I feel like that sounds toxic, but you get it. I don't have someone else that like again, this sounds toxic, that I have to stress about. I don't have someone else that that may not show up or that may stop showing up. Also, I don't have to set up interviews. And if I have these seasons where it's really difficult for me to put mental effort into something, it's okay because it's just me here. But also, what's interesting is when I started doing those YouTube videos way back in 2017, 2018, 2017, I was doing vlog style content, YouTube stuff. I was filming my life and hanging out with friends and putting in little like messages throughout the vlogs about like spirituality or politics or life advice, and trying to help people and give my perspective. Or I would have these little segments in a vlog. Like I had a mindful minute segment in the vlog at one point where I would share a tip on mindfulness. Or there was a segment in there about like today in church history that I would throw in there. But I also had this series that I started called Newspaper Liturgy, where I would look at something in the news and talk about like a healthy leftist theological perspective on the news event. And it was just me sitting and looking at a camera and talking. And I had a friend, Nick, who's like pretty much my best friend. That's like a weird category. I'm 31 years old. I feel weird saying best friend. But anyway, yeah, pretty much my best friend. He's always been a huge encouragement to me. He got his own special shout out in the acknowledgments of my book because of how supportive and encouraging he's been to me. He's witnessed me go through a lot, and he was there like, yeah, before I even left that ministry stuff. And And he encouraged me and said like he loves those videos of me just talking. And he was telling me, because he was also seeing that it was harder for me to do the vlog stuff. And he was saying like, I think you should just sit down and talk to the camera. And I remember thinking like, no, that's boring, or people won't want to listen to me just sitting there and talking. And he's like, no, I think that's what you're best at. And I love whenever you do videos like that. I was like, at the time it sounded so unbelievable. And then I just did it. And it worked out. And I unlisted all those old vlogs. And so if you go back to the beginning of my YouTube channel, that's not the beginning of my YouTube channel. It's just where I decided to stop unlisting. And there's a lot of reasons, but I don't want to get into that. We're on too many tangents right now, but it's nothing bad. It's nothing controversial. I just didn't like them. That's it. But anyway, I'm remembering that now in this moment. I also had some of those thoughts again of, well, I can't just do a podcast by myself where I just sit here and talk. People don't want to hear that. People don't want to watch that. I got to edit. I got to keep it short. I got to keep it catchy. I got to make sure that I format it in a way that's efficient and gets to the point and doesn't waste people's time. And like, there's a lot of that swimming in my brain that I need to get out like a parasite. Like these optimization tactics to get people to watch your videos. I've watched way too many of those videos. But that's swimming in my brain, and it's helpful sometimes, especially to just like make stuff that's, I just almost burped there. It's a podcast. It's okay. It's helpful to make stuff that, or what was I going to say? It's helpful advice in terms of making things that are clear and actually helpful for people. Because I think that's something that a lot of people struggle to do. They just ramble in their content, and they're not even seem to not be putting effort into making it clear so that it actually is helpful for people. But it can also be too much. And so that's all swimming in the brain. Also, stuff swimming in the brain is nobody wants to watch just me sitting there talking. I don't have enough worth saying. It's hard. It's hard for me right now. I'm going through a lot right now. It's hard to write. It's hard to make videos right now. It's been a while. I'm tired of I'm talking like that. These are things I've said to my friends over the last like 2 years, again and again. How are you doing, man? I don't know, man. It's hard right now, bro. I'm trying to write, but I just get distracted and it's hard. And I haven't posted in a while and I feel bad. I'm tired of having the same conversation, which is why we're starting a podcast, because we need to put something out. Damn it. Here we go. Another drink of water. I promise y'all, I'm not going to be taking this many drinks of water every podcast, is because I feel my throat going out. My voice will probably sound different by the end of this podcast that I did at the beginning. You're witnessing my voice actively going away because I'm getting sick. Anyway, yeah, I can do it. That's the switch. No, I can do it, actually. I have done it. When I was doing Twitch live streams, I sat there and talked for hours. And it worked, and it was fun. Nowadays, I'm not really interested in sitting there and talking for hours. Right now, it's a little too hard right now. Maybe I might come back to that one day, hours of live streams. But right now, it's a little too hard, and this is easier. I was hoping to do like 45 minutes to an hour podcasts. Right now, I'm looking. Yeah, we're like 30 some minutes. And there's still a bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk about. Dang. See? More evidence that I can, that I can do this. I have this outline here, and I was afraid that when I got to the end of the outline, it would only have been like 15, 20 minutes. And I'd be like, dang. But I don't think we've even reached halfway. Dang. Maybe I might cut some of this out. I don't know. Only the people watching the video version will be able to really know if I cut anything out, because they could see cuts. But let's see here. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me tell you a story. Oh, yeah. Okay. One of the other things that got me to think differently about podcasts is also my friendship with podcasters. Specifically, hanging out with them at events like Theology Beer Camp, which is hosted by Trip Fuller and the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. And that was a podcast I listened to like since like 2012 and was a huge fan. And also Content Warning is a brand new event. We've only done one so far, this last February in Portland, which is, I mean, these podcasts, it was hosted by the Thereafter podcast and the Go Home Bible You're Drunk podcast and a bunch of other podcasts that mostly focus on like an ex-evangelical conversation and deconstructing toxic religious beliefs, which holds space for people who are still Christian, but also like not Christian at all, or even not religious at all. And just helping, people deconstruct those toxic beliefs and find a healthier way forward. But the Theology Beer Camp folks, there's some of that too. And also people like trying to give people a better theology and a different Christianity. And so I, homies with both those groups of people, groups of podcasters. And I always felt kind of weird because I was like the only one who didn't have a podcast. And Trip Fuller, who hosts the Homebrewed Christianity podcast, is now my homie. And he was kind enough to invite me as like one of the podcasters to the event a couple years ago. And I went again this year, a couple months ago. And I was like, I felt kind of out of place and feeling like Trip did me a favor, but I kind of like snuck in a way. It felt like I snuck in because I'm not a podcaster. I'm a YouTuber, but also I've hardly posted on YouTube in a while. I felt imposter syndrome, I guess. I felt fake. I felt like I didn't really deserve to be there, especially with like hardly posting stuff. But it worked out. I fit in. I made friends. It was a good time. And leading up to this last Theology Beer Camp, I especially was feeling out of place leading up to the event because I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't posted in like a year on YouTube, barely anything on Instagram. And I bring that up to also say, like, a big reason I bring that up is also because that also meant I was hardly promoting the event, which made me feel super guilty. And again, like I was taking it, I didn't want to look like I was taking advantage of anyone. And then leading up to it, like I was also like going through a lot of mental games and insecurities about my ability to even do this work anymore. I'd been struggling to write the book. We'll save more book talk for another episode. I'll tell you all more about working on the book, but I was also, it was really hard. Overthinking everything, really hard to work on any writing. And just, feeling really insecure about my abilities and feeling like, can I even do this anymore? I've thought about that several times over the last year. There's been moments where it felt like whatever gifts or skills I had, I think they left, like a spirit leaving the body. And I hardly promoted the event, and I'm not even a real podcaster, and a lot of people don't even really know me, and I'm going to this event, and I'm gonna be on the stage at a part of a panel, because how it usually works, especially with the main sessions, is a scholar will give a talk, and then another scholar will give a short response talk, and then they'll do a panel with a podcaster or two or three, interviewing them and asking them questions. So it's like a bunch of scholars and a bunch of podcasters, God pods, they call them. And it was in Denver, Colorado, and it was the elevation killed me. The first night, I drank a bit, and I just skipped straight to nauseous drunk, because that's what elevation does to you. Not even fun drunk, it was just straight to nauseous drunk. And I've never even been nauseous drunk, but also there's also nausea from the elevation. I'm a California boy. I can't handle it. And so I got super sick the first night. I had to leave early. I tried talking to Jörg Rieger, one of my heroes, one of my favorite theologians, and we became homies last event. And I was just like very like standoffish to him, because I was like had to leave because I was getting sick, and I felt bad, like, oh my God, I look like a jerk. And I also left early. I look even more like a jerk. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm taking advantage. Came the next day, the next full day, I was just so out of it because of the elevation. It was hard to talk to anyone, which made me feel like, oh, dude, do people think like I'm just too cool for this or something? I don't want to be antisocial, but I'm struggling here. I tried to talk to people, and it was the third day that I had a session that I was going to be a part of. And then the third day came, the morning I woke up, I felt great. I was like, oh, finally, I acclimated. And I was having some cool conversations with people before that. But leading up, it was just like, and I'm saying this to say, like, those feelings of inadequacy remained heavy. And so that day, let me take another swig of water. That day, I felt great, and found out what we were doing like a couple hours before the session, like how it was going to go. And it was this scholar that was going to give a talk about the history of remembering, was the topic that Tripp gave him, which he also wanted him to combine with reading a bit from his new memoir that was coming out. And this guy's a big deal, and he's awesome. And meeting him was great. And then there was another scholar that was going to do a talk and response. And then I was going to, I had to like listen and come up with questions to ask them in the panel. And Tripp was going to be up there too. And Tripp also made clear to me, he made me feel good, telling me like, yo, like, I want you here. I like intentionally had you be on stage for this session because I really wanted you to be a part of this session. And it was one of the main sessions. And not even all the podcasters got to be in the sessions, or like in the panels, I mean. And then, yeah, and I'm like, I'm gonna roll with this. I'm excited. These are awesome people. And I feel honored. And I'm sitting there front row, listening to this talk, preparing questions. And this man giving this talk, reading from his memoir, it turns out his entire talk is from the memoir, and it's a little bit longer than we expected. And it's great stuff, but it was really hard to find points that I could link to questions to come up with. And I was freaking out a bit, but I'm writing notes. I'm like, really using my creativity to come up with questions. And I was like, okay, no, I can do this. I can come up with that. I can come up with that. And then as I got my phone because I have to pull up some text messages. As we're sitting there, Trip texts me saying that they want to go straight to the convo. The other guy wanted to skip his response talk and go straight to the panel conversation. And he said he wants to ask a few things, and then we broaden. So more convo time. And I'm sitting in the front row, text, okay, sounds good. And then he says, hell yeah. And then we go up there, and I'm sitting there like, okay, I'm looking at these. I organized these couple questions that I had to do really fast. I think I got a few good questions. And then it turns out like they're talking even longer, and I'm just sitting on the side. It's always nerve-wracking to be on the very end of a group. It's nerve-wracking to be at the very end of a group picture. And so it's like it always feels like, I don't know, that like you don't belong. Anyway, I'm on the one end, Trip's on the other end. They're talking. And I'm just sitting there feeling awkward. Like, I wonder if people are thinking, who the hell is this guy just sitting there? And I hope my question makes sense. And then as we're up there, Trip texts me. I'm reading the exact text message. Locate yourself and do follow up. Locate yourself and do follow up. Some of you may be like, what the hell is this coded language? But I knew instantly. Locate meaning I knew he meant say who you are, introduce yourself, say where you're from, give context for who you are and what you're doing here and what you do, and then do a follow-up question. So I was like, got it. I didn't text back, but in my head, I was like, got it. I just peeked at my phone, hoping nobody thought I was just scrolling on Instagram. And then I went to me, and then I introduced myself, said who I was, said I what I do. I wrote this book. Go buy my book outside at the little bookstore out there. And I said I was able to talk about like they were talking about like liberal theology and a liberal perspective, but they're like liberalism in academia has a different meaning at times and in a political sense. We don't need to get into this right now, but I was like, so yeah, I make videos, and a lot of stuff I talk about is helping people give like a different perspective on Christianity and politics, and helping people realize like their leftist political views actually make a lot of sense with their Jesus views, because Jesus calls us to a radical life. And then I was able to say like, okay, yeah. And then I'd also like, a lot of people in my community have found themselves moving beyond liberal ideas. And a big shift is realizing the difference between liberalism and leftism. Liberalism mostly being a capitalism supporting ideology, and leftism challenging capitalism. And so can you explain to us the different ways that the word liberal is used and why you use it? In my head, I'm like cheering myself on. I'm like, yes, I did it. I see Trip nodding and smiling like, yes. He answered, gave an answer. Someone else asked a question. And then Trip was like, okay, final thing. I have a question that I want each of you to answer. I forget the exact question, but it was something like, based on what we talked about, what is something you want to leave the people with listening? And right before I got on stage, this woman I met, who also happens to live in the same city I do, in Santa Maria, California, but I met her at the event. She had just bought my book that day and had skimmed it in chapter 7 and told me how much she loved this part of the book where I talk about this story about my friend who grew up evangelical and is now a leftist union organizer. And that was in the back of my head. And I realized like, oh my God, I can make this work. I could connect these things. So then one of them gave an answer, the other one gave the answer. I was the last one to speak. And I just locked in. And I said something along the lines of like, I forget exactly. I mentioned some things based on the things we had talked about. And then I said, oh, I have this friend. I spoke from the book, who grew up in an evangelical church like I did. And he was really inspired by this Jesus stuff, feeding the homeless, visiting prisoners, feeding the hungry, giving people who are sick care. And it inspired him so much that he found himself caring more about those things than his Christian community did. And as he got older, he found himself more and more interested in living out those values through politics, through union organizing, through becoming more radical, through activism. And now he's a gay communist union organizer, married to his husband. That's why I said gay. And that was another thing that made him stand out in his church community. That's also why I bring that up. The story is much longer. And if you were to look at the perspective of the God that he and I grew up with, then he is so far from God. He was on a good path and then he went astray, and it's a really sad story. But if you look at his story from the perspective of the God of the Exodus and the God of Jesus, when he says that the Spirit is upon me to set the prisoners free and feed the hungry, liberate the oppressed, then he has been on one long, consistent path, following that God, doing the work of God, which is the work of liberation. And so I encourage the people there, saying like, you have been on one long, consistent path as you're rethinking these things and challenging things, thinking about the future, trying to find different perspectives on your faith. You've been on one long, consistent path and you have not gone astray. And I felt good about that. Another drink of water. Afterward, this guy comes up to me and he's like, bro, I just finished the audiobook of your book on the plane. And then this woman comes up and says, hey, that was great. I really appreciated what you had to say, especially because as this session was going, I got a text from my very conservative grandfather who found out that I was at this event and texted me to tell me how disappointed he was that I was here. And so when I said what I said, it like really hit her and showed her like, yeah, it resonated. And I was like, whoa, that's heavy. And then afterward, there's a huge weight lifted off me. Now, here's why I'd say that story. I think what was super fun about all that was that trip threw me into this, what is it? This adventure, this obstacle, this situation, this scenario that required me to think quickly and creatively. And the best part about it was knowing that he trusted me to do that. I remember this is a guy I listened to years ago, back in 2012, and was listening to his podcast, listening to all these authors. Now hanging out with some of these authors and hanging out with Tripp and realizing I'm not out of place. I'm not inadequate. I'm not an imposter. I belong. I have something to say, And most importantly, I have something to give still. I haven't lost anything. I don't need to give up. I'm not going to quit. And I think those thoughts of that I just need to stop and run away is narrow thinking. And the reality is my approach just needs to change. Which happens as for people who make stuff. You change your approach, you change your perspective, you change your topic of things you talk about, and you roll with it. And so it's going to keep happening. Things just keep changing, period. I think that one of the biggest things I've learned as my mental health has gone up and down, and I've been learning a lot about myself, and so many emotions have been coming up that I've been processing and working through, and I'm in a really good place now. But one of the big things I've learned that has really helped me. Also, let me rephrase that. I'm not like in a super good place. I'm not awesome. I'm pretty good. Okay, you get it. One of the biggest things I've learned is I kept thinking I'll be okay when I can feel like I used to feel. When I can feel good the way I used to feel good. When I can feel creative the way I used to feel creative. When I could create the way I used to create. When I could write the way I used to write. When I could think the way I used to think. I need to work on myself and change myself and heal myself so I can feel good again like I used to. That's an illusion. That's not how life works. Things just change, period. Life just changes, period. There is no going back. I have changed, and I'm still learning the ways that I have changed. And now it's time to catch up. We're changing their approach. We're starting a podcast. Lastly, I really did not think everything I've said so far on that outline was going to take this long. There's actually a couple more things I wanted to say. Lastly, perhaps. Why perhaps? Why perhaps? Let's wrap this up and take a drink of water before we wrap it up. Dang, I was hoping this episode would be like 30 minutes. We'll see. It don't matter. It's a podcast. Perhaps. First of all, I felt like I needed a name for this podcast. And I mean, mostly because like podcast hosting, I mean, I'll put this on the YouTube channel. Don't necessarily need a name for it there, but I got to put it on podcast hosting website, and it goes to Apple Podcasts and other podcast apps, and you need a name. And I overthought that a lot. And I wanted a cool one. And I wanted a short one. I wanted like a catchy, punchy one. And I thought about it. I came up with a few different ideas. Liked some of it. Hated others. I even thought about just calling it the Damon Garcia podcast. Fuck it. The Damon Garcia podcast. But, and also mostly out of a spirit of like, let's stop overthinking and just do something. The Damon Garcia podcast. But I also thought, I could do better. Also, I don't really, it's a little pretentious maybe. But mostly, I could do better. That's mostly the spirit of not choosing that one. Anyway, thought more. Perhaps came to mind. And I think the person who like first got me to love the word perhaps is John Caputo, theologian, philosopher, radical theologian, postmodern philosopher. He has been super inspiring for me. But he wrote a book called The Insistence of God, where he talks about a theology of perhaps. And perhaps, the way he uses it, is very different from I don't know. Perhaps is not about indecisiveness. It's about an openness to risk. And he talks about having that perhaps with God and theology and other points of theology and politics and justice. It's a very heady book, very, very, very dense, but awesome. One of my favorite books. And really, yeah, about an openness to it. Instead of having these very strong, unmovable beliefs about God that can't be challenged, being open to all those things being wrong about God, and being open to an event that is harbored in the name of God, is how he would word it. But really, like an event, an experience, I guess you could say too, a moment, a process through which we experience something that we use the word God for. And understanding that we don't know what that's attached to, where those events come from, where those experiences come from, where that call comes, where that provocation comes from. We don't really know. We can't know for sure. We can't be certain. That's like the wrong category of knowledge. There's something though. Something I know not what, is how he would say. Very, very poetic and very heady. But what I liked, I'm not saying this podcast is based on his idea, perhaps. I'm just saying he's the first guy that got me to like the word. What I like about it is like, different from I don't know, it's more committal. It's leaning in. It's not sitting on the fence neutral and throwing your hands up and saying, well, I don't know, I can't be bothered. It's, well, perhaps. Let's explore. Let's go on an adventure here. Let's open ourselves to risk. Let's keep thinking, keep talking, keep living, keep practicing, and explore this together, knowing that we'll never fully know, but perhaps. And so the way that I'm interested in using the word in my podcast is doing that active leaning in toward something constructive. I'm tired of deconstructing. I'm tired of critiquing all the time. And when I say that, I mean I'm tired of just critiquing. I'm interested in giving something constructive, something affirmative, something substantial. That's the word. As opposed to just using this platform to talk about, well, this conservative Christian is bad. Get a load of what this pastor said. Get a load of what Trump said. Isn't he awful? Isn't he evil? Isn't he toxic? Isn't he horrible? Aren't those people so bad? Aren't those ideas so regressive, so evil, so blah, blah, blah? Let's react. Let's react to this guy saying something ridiculous. Oh my God. I can't do it. It's like, y'all do it. Y'all do it. Y'all do it. Y'all do it. Other people can do deconstruction content. Other people can do critique. But my heart isn't in it. That's all. I don't mean to make fun of anyone who loves making podcasts and videos and articles and posts or engaging with those things that are about like criticizing or deconstructing or breaking down, condemning bad things. That has its place. But yeah, my heart's not in it. I want to give something. I want to give something substantial. I want to give something affirmative. I want to give something constructive. And I think that's why a lot of y'all have stuck around, because I've always been about that since the beginning. And I just want to lean into it. So I'm still the same guy. Still the homie. Still a Christian. Still a leftist. But this isn't a leftist podcast. This isn't a Christian podcast. This isn't a Christian leftist podcast. This isn't a political podcast. This isn't a theological podcast, spiritual podcast. It's just a podcast where I can talk about those things, but from a bigger perspective, and stretch beyond some of those boundaries, and also talk about stuff happening in culture, pop culture, my life, y'all's lives, news. We'll talk about a bunch of stuff here. I actually was hoping I could, talk maybe about more stuff this episode. I didn't think this whole episode was just going to be me explaining how we got here, why I'm starting a podcast. But here we are. It doesn't matter. My voice is gone. My voice is cracked because it's gone. Another drink of water, and then we'll close this out. Lastly, I'm tired of being a teacher. I'm tired of being someone who comes on here whose purpose is to teach people things. Teaching can happen. Education can happen. Advice can happen. Learning can happen. But I don't like putting that pressure on myself. This is like an internal switch. This has nothing to do with y'all. Y'all do what you want. Y'all, if you learn anything from me, cool, fun. It's an internal switch. I don't like putting that pressure on myself anymore, because that's another thing that held me back, is that anytime I turn on a camera and talk to it, I have to be giving something valuable or educational or whatever. Those things can happen, but I just want to be a friend. That's what I want to be on this podcast. Just a friend, sharing what I love and what I'm leaning into, what I'm passionate about, and what I think is important, and the type of world that I want to see more of, which requires a radical imagination. The type of world where we can all be free from the oppression that we face in this capitalist, colonialist, white supremacist, sexist, patriarchal society that puts so many constrictions on us in order to keep a privileged, rich, owning, ruling class satisfied and happy. We need a radical imagination to challenge those systems and to get out of that. And we need to zoom in more too. That's a very zoomed out perspective, this big historical materialist perspective. But I want to zoom in more too. Talk about how it feels to be in this messed up world, looking for community, trying to find other people who understand, who can help me feel seen and known, understood, and could be there for each other. And how difficult it is to find that and what that's like. Now I'm just rambling. But these are just, some of my thoughts on what I'm trying to lean into for this podcast. Thank you all for listening and watching on YouTube. I'm going to put this on a podcast hosting website. I don't know when, but it'll be soon, I guess. And now I'm trying to remember, what are the podcast host things to say at the end? I used to have a podcast. So, there's an Apple Podcast. You could do reviews. Yeah. Leave a good review. And, what else? Like and subscribe. And, what else? Leave a comment on the YouTube here. Say what's up. And say, if you listened all the way, oh yeah, let's have a little thing to say at the end. If you listened all the way, if you listened all the way, say, say, perhaps, 3 times, so I know that you're a real one. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next week. We're gonna do this. Like I said, I had a lot more to say actually on this little outline here, but we'll bring it back. We'll run it back. See you later. Thank you. Bye bye.